Bethesda's games are fantastic open world sandboxes where you can roleplay as whatever character you'd like to play as. But one consistent issue with those games for allowing that kind of role playing creativity is the introduction to the game and how it leads you toward the main quest. So I think the most noticeable one here is Oblivion, where it is extremely heavy handed in trying to set the trajectory for your character. You start out specifically as a prisoner, so obviously there's some things decided about you there. You are then told by the Emperor that you are essentially the chosen one who has been foreseen as ending and saving the world from this cataclysmic event, and you are the one that must do it. That's some pretty significant momentum to add to the narrative right from the beginning. But then also you're handed the Amulet of Kings, which is incredibly valuable and important to lore, and is the only way that this Oblivion crisis can be stopped, and you cannot drop it from your inventory. So even if you decide to, save the game before you exit the sewers and then just make new characters from that, every single new character you make from that point is still going to be walking around with the Amulet of Kings on them. So anytime you scroll through your inventory and see that, there's always that reminder that you should really be working on the main quest because it's the only thing that actually matters. It's just essentially you are given such momentum from these quests, like the introduction to the game, that it's pretty hard to roleplay effectively and really try to springboard off of events in the game, but then ignore something that is that drastic. So I think like one of the best things in Elder Scrolls games, and Bethesda games in general, is, obviously the modding. And pound for pound, the best mods, in my opinion, are alternate start mods. Because I really like to roleplay as different characters that have a different purpose in that world and a different way of seeing things. And those alternate start mods, even though they're not extremely complex mods, they allow me to play the game in a way that feels different each time because I have a different starting trajectory and all sorts of different decisions and exploration then arises from that initial trajectory. So something I'm interested in doing with this game is baking in alternate starts from the beginning and having that as a core feature of the game. It is something that is still very, very much a prototype. It needs a tremendous amount of work still. But today I'd just like to ramble about that design a little bit and what I'm trying to accomplish with it. So the general setup here is the first thing. Right now I am controlling this character. If I switch to third person, you see I'm controlling this little test character. But I can hit P to... It's the possess key, basically, and it unpossessed that character. So what I am right now, I can't switch to third person because I am essentially an invisible floating character. This is the god pawn. This is the god character that you're controlling. So in Unreal, the characters that you can possess and take control of are called pawns. So this is the god pawn, and then all these other characters around here, they are pawns. But something I can do is, take or select a single character and then hit P, and now I am possessing that character. I am in first person here, but then I can swap over to third. So you see that I am controlling that character, and pop out again. So it is possible to, you know, take control of characters and essentially control different characters in the world. Right now, I can possess any character. The plan is to make it so you can just possess, you know, characters that you are allowed to possess, and the specific mechanics for deciding that are, you know, largely going to be, you know, the characters you created are the ones you can possess, but then, you know, some other ones that you could take control of would be like companions you recruited. Pardon me. But the idea here is that the game would be persistent, and essentially you would be able to make multiple characters within the game. I'm not exactly sure how well that will work, and it's got a lot of design challenges, so I'm not going to try to ramble about that specifically too much in this little video here. Instead, I want to talk more about the character creation, but I just wanted to get that idea first, in that you know, can fall back to this other character. It's not, I guess, too relevant now that I think about it, but the idea here is, as you are playing the game, you can be unlocking start points in the game. So right now, the main way I have it set up just for testing is I just have like a key you hit, and then it makes a start point. But it also is a thing that I can place them in the world. I do have a few little bugs to sort out, and I basically want to recode this whole process because I've thought about it more, realized, you know, I want to do some things differently. So I'm going to rebuild that. But the setup is you can make a start point, and then, you know, you pick your creature type, and then from the creature type, you know, you also have backgrounds that you can pick. So let's say I pick thief, you know, then you have additional things you can adjust, like these. It's kind of like adjusting your attributes in Dungeons and Dragons, or like the Fallout games, like the special stats, where you're kind of using a point buy system. You know, you put extra points into athletics, which means you're going to have to take points out, you know, somewhere else and kind of get it so it balances out at, you know, -0 here. You know, you can rename your character and stuff, but then you hit finalize, the character just goes about their business, but, you know, you can also possess that character. And because I had picked, I think it was the thief background, maybe actually I have that set up so it doesn't have any backgrounds to it. Or actually, no, I know what it is. I need to, yeah. Basically, I need to redo that workflow. So basically, whenever I had clicked it, and then like that's when it does the thing, but then I changed the creature type, which no longer had that applied. You know, so basically if I take the thing, then I click thief, it will work this time. So then I can possess the character, go to skills, and actually maybe thief just does not have anything. So if I go to, where do I have it? I guess it would be info assets, and creature background infos, and thief. No, it should be granting something, so. I type click thief. Okay. Okay, well, that's odd, actually. Mage wise. Okay, that one worked. Well, like I said, it needs to be redone anyway. But the idea here is you would basically be unlocking things on the character as you go. So as you're going through the world, you can find different spawn points that exist, and then you can expand from those, or then you can make new characters at those spawn points. So you would have the initial start where your character's created, like, let's say, even if you did want to do the like really elaborate start for something like Oblivion, where it does very clearly present you some kind of main quest. There is a primary narrative you are supposed to be interacting with. And it's designed to put you on that trajectory and make it feel important, teach you things about the world. You have a lot of tutorialization to really show that these are the mechanics, here's how you can interact with things. You can still present people with that initially. But as they're going, let's say with Oblivion, you have that set up, you start that first character, you have the exact same initial start setup. But then you release out into the world, and you go, as you walk around, you get to your first town, you find an inn, and at that inn, as you enter into it, it would basically just unlock another start point that you can use. So then the next time you're making a character, you can see all the start points that you have in the world, and then you can decide to select that one to build your new character. So I believe this will throw an error here, or it won't. Okay. The things I thought worked didn't, and the things I thought wouldn't do. So I just need to rewrite this system. But basically, you get to some place, you can unlock these other start points, and they can have their own kind of momentum in the world, or they can be very generalized. So like an inn, that's a very generic thing. You can really imagine basically any character being at an inn. And the idea is they would basically, while you're creating your character, they would show your character doing something. So like, obviously this start point, you make the character, they're just standing there, doing nothing. But the idea is you'd like walk into the inn, and the start point itself is like sitting at the bar of the inn, on a stool there. You're then making your character, they're actually like sitting on that bar stool. You circle around them, check them out, do your customization. They're like playing animations, like drinking some ale as they're going. You get all your things sorted out, you're flipping around, it's switching to different creature types and stuff as you're going. Their gears switching whenever you switch like the starting backgrounds, like gear options, traits. You see all these different things. You have your like creature customization stuff to, adjust their cosmetic options and everything. You get everything sorted out. You hit finalize, and then it would kind of like auto possess the character, and the character is just like sitting there, just kind of locked in that animation cycle, of just like drinking and such. You can then look around and take control then, and then you just stand up, and the characters, they're off, they're doing whatever they're doing. But the idea there, you'd have different points in the world to make the character. Some of them would be like inns where it'd be very generalized. Some of them would be more specific things that do have more of an actual trajectory established. Being a prisoner, or like a bodyguard for some noble, a librarian, whatever it might be. You have that kind of setup, and with that, it could also give you some starting quests. So obviously you do that main quest in Oblivion, that the start. You're told to close shut the jaws of Oblivion, and you are given that amulet to take to Joffrey. But then you have the same kind of concept where you could have just like, you're a bodyguard for some noble, they want you to protect them as they're traveling through town, and that can like turn into a quest in some manner, basically. Or you're that librarian, and there's just like a little quest to collect books and just do basically library work, where you could just have kind of repeating quests where it's just like you're doing that job. The inn, it could have some kind of start point where you're like a patron at the inn, or you could be an actual worker there where like you just get kind of recurring quests to just do things at that inn. And the idea is you basically play through that, and you as like the role playing person, you decide kind of what to springboard off of and what should actually start you adventuring, if you adventure at all. Like a really enjoyable Skyrim playthrough I had. I did one of those alternate starts, and I started at a farm, and I just played for quite a while, just pretending I was a farmer, just going about really standard tasks, gathering some stuff, taking it into the market and everything, just really bland stuff. But then slowly, just like imagine that initial thing, like, oh, I'm wondering what's in the world beyond, like stop and like gaze out over vistas and stuff. And then, because there are so many events and stuff that happen in Skyrim, something is eventually going to knock you out of that and kind of encourage you to adventures. So I see, people run by fighting, and I run over to help, and end up with a weapon because of that. And it just kind of leads to some actual role play, and then your character has a real trajectory that is not like some prophecy important role in the world, really, but it's kind of what you make of it and such. And there's just a very different trajectory, very different way to go about it. But it's something that's generally pretty low effort development wise. Like, you can put all of your effort into making that initial tutorial, basically, and making the thing that really does set people on that trajectory and introduce them to the game and show them all the mechanics and, get them interested in the world. Like Skyrim's cart scene, where they really try to illustrate all these different things in this layered approach, where they show, the conflict of the Civil War. They show like people's general beliefs on, the gods and stuff, like how they should feel about some certain things. Like they really introduce a lot of different elements of the game to really give you a feel for the world in a lot of different ways, and kind of set the tone as well, where it's like this slow paced kind of thing. Nothing too drastic's happening. It really kind of sets the tone for the game that you are supposed to take things slow all the time and really just look around at the scenery, soak things in, rather than starting off like super action packed. They do give you that slow pace, and I think that is really good, because they do set the trajectory for the world. They set the tone for things. But then after that, and you've already experienced that, it's kind of not super enjoyable to play that same tutorialized section of a game over and over again. So you can have things that are much more generic, and I kind of think of it, you can still have other places that are tutorialized. Like, you could have multiple, you can have a lot of it, like thinking about World of Warcraft, where they have the individual zones for, starting zones for each kind of starting race, but they're all different. They all feel quite a bit different. They're kind of trying to lead into totally different stories. Everything about it is quite a bit different. this game is just goofy as hell. But it's too much. But basically, you're going through those different events and everything, but you then unlock these other starting trajectories, essentially, these starting areas. And something I also am doing with it, you're unlocking different options as well. So it's another option, or it's another big issue with role playing games, where they're always torn between making a system or like systems and then a character creation process that are really in depth, really allow for a lot of fine granular control and customization, or something that is actually accessible to people. So if you have a really complex role playing game that has a lot of different attributes, all these different like traits and capabilities and such on your character, that's fantastic for people who are into that, and it's also fantastic for people who are starting additional characters. Like you have all these ways to make a very different character, because you just have so many options, so you can make a very different character. But for the new player, they don't know what any of those skills do, any of the attributes, anything like that. Like you play Morrowind for the first time, play Daggerfall for the first time. There's a very good chance you're going to make a character that is essentially non-functional in the world because you don't understand the mechanics of the game. You don't understand how the attributes work, how the leveling systems work. You really just don't know what you're even going to like in the game. So you might make a character that is designed for doing spell casting, and then you find out like, oh, your mana doesn't regen over time, so it's more of a process of like trying to figure out how to utilize spells efficiently and like plan them out throughout your adventure, and you're like, that's just not a playstyle I really like. Or maybe you try to make a melee based character and you're like, well, I don't like that there's like dice based hit rolls, or I wanted there to be like a dodge key or whatever it might be. You make a character for more when you make a character that does block, and then you find out like, oh, it only works on shields. That's kind of weird. And it's like, oh, I can't even actively block with my shield. This is just not what I was after. So you just kind of end up making characters a lot of time that you end up having to restart. And particularly in games that have that big elaborate tutorial to start things off, that really is designed to teach you things and set momentum and stuff. You make your character, then you have to redo that tutorial, after you made that character, because you realize you made a bad character or something you didn't really mesh with super well. So something I am working on for that is trying to still have that complex character creation process, but make it very simple from the beginning. And I'm really trying to lean on the modularity of Magic the Gathering in order to make that work. So the idea is whenever you initially start the game, and you're making a character, you have your options, and all of these things are gained in a modular manner. So you would start out with just a few creature types, and you start out with the archetypes, like the most obvious familiar things when it comes to role-playing games. You start with those. Everyone can understand them. It's very clear what is what. So you have, warrior, mage, thief. Everyone gets that. But then the idea is, as you're playing the game, you're unlocking additional options. So you go over here to, this mage guild over here. There are some books. You click on a book, and something the book did is Spellsword background has been unlocked. So what that allows me to do then is, now I'm making a character, I have another background. So this is another set of starting gear and spells and abilities and all that kind of stuff that your character can start with. And you can unlock more of these over time as you go. You can unlock more creature types. The idea is there also would be like traits for your character where you'd be doing kind of a trade-off kind of thing. Like maybe you have some kind of phobia that your character gets, or generally they would be things that would maybe give like a negative and a positive. Some will be all positive, some all negative. But the general idea with it as well is that all these different things don't have to be the same power level. So I want to extend the point buy system from being just, this kind of setup with point buys. I have to assign a character first, but having the point buys for, the aptitudes, I want to expand that so it is instead kind of dispersed between all of these different things. So essentially the creature types would all have some kind of cost. The different backgrounds have a cost. The traits all have a cost. And you have a net cost to then, where you have a certain amount of points that you can use to create this character. And, sometimes if you want to have a really strong creature type, you might have to take some traits that are, really negative. Or you could, take a bunch of extra points off of your aptitudes in order to have some points to spare that would then get used, to maybe buy a better trait or whatever it might be. So the general idea is that you have a bunch of complex components, and I also want to expand to some other things as well, but they need more prototyping. But you can end up having a complex character design that gives you this character creation kind of setup that allows for a lot of granular control, and a lot of different start points you are unlocking in the world that allow for some very different starting trajectories for your character. But all of that kind of stuff is set up to be gained through gameplay. So you're presented with very simple character creation from the start. You play the character, you're not overwhelmed by decisions. You just kind of focus on learning the stuff that initial tutorial start needs to teach you. You are shown the basics of combat, just movement controls, like the general setup of the UI, that kind of stuff. You get some basic tutorialization, but then you quickly unlock another start point. You start unlocking a few other backgrounds just to show that, that's how the game is set up. It kind of works on, the card collection mechanics. But then, the game is designed around being permadeath, like a hardcore kind of thing. So, you're supposed to be making other characters as you go. You really, would not be just starting with just that one. So you're going to have plenty of opportunities to use those new backgrounds and alternate start points and such as you go. But it really then allows you to present a small amount of information to the player initially, but then also have a very complex, in-depth character creation process for people who are more experienced at the game. Plus it blends in some just neat collection and achievement kind of elements because you're doing things to unlock these other backgrounds and such, and all the different traits and everything. So it just kind of, I think, can solve a lot of those general issues of presenting an overwhelmingly complex system to the player up front, because it's just really based on a slow kind of collection. It's very largely based on Magic the Gathering's kind of new player acquisition setup. At least when I started playing, they had starter decks and starter sets and everything. They had this starter set where, so obviously Magic has a very complex rule set. It also has an enormous amount of complexity whenever you start taking all the rules exceptions that exist on the cards into account. But they have a starter set where there are little gameplay mats saying, here's where you place your library and your graveyard and all this kind of stuff. It says the basic phases of the turn, your untap, upkeep, draw kind of stuff. It also has pre-made decks that are very straightforward, and they teach the specific basics of the rules that you're going to keep using throughout the rest of the game. They don't get into really complex stuff. They don't worry about like instance and priority and counter spells and such. It's more that here's how you draw cards, gain mana, play down creatures, do basic like combat, that kind of stuff. So you have this very tutorialized process, but then they also have this starter set where you can unlock, some other simple cards and just kind of get the feel for like, oh, okay, I can change things out. I can do that. And then you can get into the more complex sets. And at least they used to have like a difficulty level on the sets. Whereas like this is an expert set, this is a starter set. So they could kind of say like how complex the cards in the set are going to be. But everything was just introduced in a very slow manner. It felt much more manageable. And it's a fantastic way to introduce a complex system. So I think that is a fantastic way to do things in an RPG, particularly when the RPG is designed around, being hardcore or permadeath. It's something that doesn't work as well in like a long duration game where it's just kind of expected you're going to make this character then play through the whole game. But you end up finding pretty often those games, people will make their first character, realize they don't like what they made or they didn't understand the rules, and then they make a new character anyway. And that's something a lot of the systems in Skyrim, over time, Bethesda kind of shaved off a lot of the actual role-playing elements from their games because they wanted to make it so people didn't really have to feel like they had to make a new character. It's part of the reason at least. You don't want to turn people off by presenting a tremendous amount of complexity of the game up front. People need to be worked into it at a reasonable pace, and generally they want the design to be that you can start the game, kind of realize you didn't make the character you can just adapt your character over time, make them change, make whatever adjustments, but you didn't like lock yourself out of things. You didn't totally screw yourself over with that. But I would like to kind of just have it more where you can lock yourself out of things from the start, where you can make a character that is just not what you want, basically. But by the time you are doing that, you should be informed of the decision, essentially. Like, you should know kind of what you're getting into once you start picking backgrounds and creature types and all that kind of thing that are actually going to lock you out of a lot of options. So essentially you would start off with, the mage, warrior, thief kind of backgrounds that are very generic. You kind of understand them, but they're pretty versatile. They're not like, it's a warrior. It's not, a knight of some specific order that then has these specific like gameplay rules, like a paladin or something like that, where like they have a specific deity they're worshiping and they have behavior rules, and if they break those rules they can lose their powers, that kind of stuff. It wouldn't be that kind of thing. It would be more just like a generic warrior that you can really be pretty flexible with that and change things in a lot of ways. And the way I think of it with like the backgrounds as well, generally like you can have a background in something, but you can pivot pretty hard. Like, so I don't want the background to determine too much of your future. A lot of the things that would really be locking you out of things would be more like the traits, or like I would kind of like some additional like quests or kind of story things that you can be involved in as like another kind of thing you could unlock and attach to a character. But the general idea is that the things are introduced in a slow enough manner but and they're introduced in the world in such a way that by the time you unlock them, you have kind of proven you understand that thing. Like you unlock some various like magic related traits and mage things by like doing the first couple quests, like the tutorialized stuff at the mage's guild or something. Like you kind of acquire the things over time in a way that makes it so it makes some sense. And part of that with the unlocks and everything is that all of these things are tagged to work in a specific way. So like the gameplay tags are kind of like hashtags, but different, or they work in a hierarchy. But the general idea that they're a way to add descriptors to things to say that this thing is a specific thing. Like if you had a sword, maybe you have it tagged as like item dot weapon dot melee dot sword. So like you that it is an item, it's a melee weapon, that kind of stuff. But you have all these descriptor tags on these backgrounds and traits and everything. And then the idea is, as you're going, these little stations that you're creating things at, like you go to the inn and you have this little like creature creation station spawn point kind of thing that you find, which generally you wouldn't see in this mode, but basically it will do like a kind of querying on the tags for these backgrounds and such to determine what is valid as a choice there. So like you go to an inn, maybe it's set up so like essentially anything's okay to like be sitting at the inn, but they have to be like a humanoid, so like the horse, you can't have a horse at the inn. And that's there for testing. I don't know if you'll actually be able to play as horses or not. We'll see. But, like it would query to say like, for all the options that you personally have unlocked, which things are allowed to be used here. So like, yeah, okay, you can use any of these humanoids, and everything else is basically fine because it's an inn. But you go to somewhere a little more specific, and then it's like, you start down in the in the sewers at a gambling parlor or something, like this really seedy place, and it's like the backgrounds that are available there, it's like, well, there's no reason for like a paladin to be down there gambling. There's no reason for like a cleric or a priest or whatever. So you're like, okay, you want to have like the seedier kind of types, like you're gonna have like thief and smuggler and assassin and all that kind of stuff, like those, maybe they have like some criminal tag on them, so it's like only criminals are allowed to spawn at this area. So basically you have your list of all of the things that you have unlocked, and then it just basically queries those tags to determine what things are actually valid choices there. And it can be kind of the same thing with traits and all that kind of stuff. Like at any kind of possible unlock, there needs to be some way to determine what actually makes sense in some specific area and such. So basically, you're unlocking these things over time, but then you're also going ahead and unlocking new places to use them. You can also then kind of have like specifically challenging places to use them. So like I had mentioned an idea of a start for like you're a bodyguard for some noble. They have more specific things where it's like they don't want any criminals. You kind of have to be like a warrior or a knight or something, and you kind of start with some initial scenario that is kind of tailored for that kind of general background, and it might be particularly difficult or not. Something I have thought is neat with Morrowind mods, people will make like save games and have, custom dungeons, that kind of stuff, where you're like supposed to start the dungeon with this specific save game in this specific spot, and then it's kind of like a puzzle and a challenge mode that you have to try to complete that. So like there's a lot of potential for the specific start points and everything to have their own kind of trajectories and challenges and quests and that kind of stuff to deal with. Yeah, so it's a system that needs quite a lot of work. There's a whole lot of things with it that, as I've been prototyping, I've kind of realized, like, okay, this system needs to be totally redesigned over how I started building it. A lot of stuff that just really needs to be tested and such. But I've got a pretty clear idea of like the basics of the systems at this point, and there's nothing that seems too unwieldy, really. It's one of those things, obviously, stuff can arise that turns out to be more complex than I expected, but like the general concepts and such of like unlocking them, that's fine. Having the little modular acquisition and everything. So like some of the next things to do, I do want to remake the process entirely for like doing the creature, because right now I have it in a pretty odd manner, and also a lot of it's set up where like you select your creature type, and then as you're clicking the like backgrounds and all that kind of stuff, it is actually applying to the creature that is just kind of there as a template. And I would prefer to do it where it just kind of all applies at the end. And also like the point buy kind of system right now with like the aptitudes, those are entirely set up to work only, like, see, I can't adjust anything until I have a character selected, and then then it works. But like it's actually making the adjustment to this character that is there. Like this is an actual character. It is changing the things as I go and just kind of keeping track of what it has changed. But I would like the things instead where like all the things you're selecting are kind of just being set up, and then it'll all apply once the character is finalized. And then there's just, a ton of other little things, and also expand it so I do have some other categories like, traits, and you can see how the body is set up in individual parts. I want it to be so you can actually kind of swap some of those out to make some modifications, and not just in a cosmetic manner, like, to some degree, obviously, just switching the cosmetics. But I really like the just concept that form determines function and function determines form, and your character should be able to actually like swap out some different body parts that work differently, and would basically add different adjustments to your character, like stat wise and such, and then also work for modified parts as far as like prosthetics and stuff. So like, I really like the body part kind of system in Cyberpunk where you can actually adjust that. But like I have adaptation as one of my aspects, and one of the things it is going to govern is having like modified body parts and that kind of stuff. Like that'll be part of what it does, because that's something they do in Cyberpunk that I think is very effective. But I would like to have it where it is actually like swapping out the body part and everything. We'll see. But I think there's a lot of potential. You start a character, you give them like a peg leg or a prosthetic eye or whatever, and it's adjusts their capabilities in some manner. But there's a ton of complexity to that. We'll see how far I actually get with that. But basically, you can have all those individual things, and I need to set them up so that the point buy system for them all works together from one generic pool, instead of having it, as these isolated things. So like the whole actual creature creation process really needs to be rebuilt, basically. And then just like some convenience things for the unlock so that they work a little bit better and that kind of stuff. But like overall, I really like the general concept of it, and I really like the idea of not necessarily having a main quest to the game. Like, I don't intend to do a main quest. I think of it more that like there are some narratives that will be more important than others, like more impactful, have a larger influence on the world, but there's not like one specific primary thing, like Alduin returning or something that really is driving the whole world and doing, some major things. But you can still have characters that are kind of encouraged on some kind of specific trajectory. And just the general idea of like slowly introducing the complexity to the player, having things set up so it is like a permadeath kind of design where like you are going to be encouraged to use these systems, and it kind of has that roguelite kind of element to it where each character is getting killed, but you're still gaining things during those deaths, so it's not a total restart. Like you are still unlocking extra capabilities for that character or for future characters. So yeah, there's a ton of things to do, ton of things to work on, but I just wanted to ramble a little bit about the general design for that system and where I want to go next with it. So thanks for listening.